The shooting at an Orlando LGBTQ nightclub on Saturday has renewed discussions about issues that Coloradans sadly find all too familiar. Gun control, how to respond to American-born terrorism, and even mental health issues are among the topics that have dominated the national discussion since last weekend. Later tonight, Channel 12 will proudly broadcast a legacy documentary from our archives, Inner Journeys Public Stands. It's at 9 p.m. It's all about the battle over Amendment 2 here over 20 years ago. Patty, another tragic event brings up so many different issues. One of the Colorado connections, at least to the response, Senator Michael Bennet was part of a Democratic filibuster about gun issues that may go somewhere. But of the different Colorado connections, what are some of the headlines that struck you most?
Well, one of the crazy Colorado connections, what are the odds that his ex-wife, the shooter's ex-wife, is living in Boulder, and who gave us an entry into just how sick this mind was, what pushed him over the end, but he had been beating her 7 years ago, 7 years ago, so we know this guy had serious problems involving a lot of different things. We don't know how much of it was inspired by outside terrorism, how much was hatred of gays, how much was hatred of women. He clearly was a problem. But when you look at the Colorado connections, you think about some of the lessons we learned from Columbine, and one of them was SWAT teams don't wait to go in. That is the biggest lesson of Columbine, because while you have people being held hostage, you have people who are bleeding to death on the floor. That's what happened to Dave Sanders, the teacher at Columbine. And by what we've heard from some accounts here, that's definitely what happened to some of the victims, of the 49 victims in this shooting. So that's one of the lessons there's so much to unpack here. We don't know if he was motivated by terrorism, external terrorism, by hatred of gays. We don't know if it would have made a difference if they'd broken in earlier. We don't know if the guns made a difference, why the FBI looked at him and then decided not to look at him. So we will find out a lot more as things go on, but we have to remember that homegrown terrorism is as big a danger to us here. You look at the Aurora Theater shootings, you look at Columbine, that's not ISIS.
David, it seems two of the major issues coming out of it, at least responded from politicians, are both in the terrorism level of what to do about folks, whether they're homegrown or not, inspired terrorist acts, and if there's any wiggle room on gun control debate issues, if it's not just the far edges, I think, of that conversation, but the ones in the middle, that there could be some compromise. From what you take of both of those sides, what were your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a time when we hope for leadership from our political leaders, and we haven't been getting it this week. Donald Trump's first reaction was a tweet congratulating himself, and he spent the rest of the week in his usual mental miasma of self-contradictory rants. He's failed the presidential leadership test. He's a choker, a lightweight, and a loser. Mrs. William Clinton came out and announced that, well, if you're under suspicion by the FBI, you shouldn't have access to weapons. And maybe we can all at least agree on this point, that if you're under criminal investigation by the FBI for violating the Espionage Act, then you shouldn't have nuclear weapons. President Obama and the White House came out with their usual script about how he's an excellent counterterrorism fighter, which is true in the sense that Rain Man is an excellent driver. And then he pivoted to the issue that really energizes him, which is wagging his finger at the American people and lecturing them that they better stop being so Islamophobic. Michael Bennet, our senator, knows how to be a serious person, but didn't decide to do that this week. He joined the Bloomberg filibuster in favor of a new gun control law, which the FBI director says would harm counterterrorism, and which is so egregiously violative of due process that it's opposed by the American Civil Liberties Union and by Mother Jones Magazine, both of which don't think that people even have Second Amendment rights. We're in a situation where the leadership is not leading, it's failing. People are on their own. We have to be our own first responders. And so the most constructive thing that's been done this week is firearms instructors around the country are volunteering to provide free gun safety training classes to LGBT persons, and lots of them are taking up that offer.
Penn, I've been accused of being a Pollyanna when it comes to politics for a long, long time. In my Pollyanna little mind, it seems like there would be some wiggle room in the middle and maybe even some deal-making possibility when it comes to whether it's strengthening some movements on terrorist activities and some compromise on some particular gun issues. I'm not talking about wholesale assault weapon bans, but there seems to be some wiggle room. Are you joining the chorus that I'm just being completely Pollyanna about this?
No, I don't think you're being completely Pollyanna. I think your timing's off, though. I think the real problem with this, well, there are a number of problems with this situation, one of which we don't know enough about what's going on to really determine how to respond. Patty raises the wife. I mean, the earliest news report I saw this morning was the gunman's texting his wife or ex-wife while he's in the theater, the club, killing people, and she's texting him back, "I love you." Something weird is going on, that she was with him when he cased the joint before he decided to go there. Something strange is happening, that all of a sudden he starts referencing these terroristic sites and everything where no one had seen this behavior years before in the past. And remember, this is not, despite Donald Trump's desires to the contrary, this is not an immigrant. This guy was born in Queens. So he's not an imported terrorist. He's homegrown. I don't know if he's nuts. I don't know if he's a terrorist. We don't know enough about what's happening. But clearly some sort of reaction to and dealing with guns and weapons is going to be involved in this. We've said it before, I'll say it again. The Second Amendment is not an absolute, and I think we have to be mindful of the context in which it was written. These guys had black powder loaded muzzle pistols is what they were dealing with. They weren't dealing with semi-automatic weapons with M16s that were designed for warfare, and now we're seeing them on the streets of this country. That's going to be part of the solution. That's going to be part of the conversation.
Ed, do you think the issues from this tragedy become a bigger part of the Colorado election cycle this year?
I don't know that it becomes a huge part of the Colorado election cycle. I think people are going to have more of a national conversation about this, and if not just because of this one incident, but because of the mounting number of incidents. But I mean, so far we've been talking about terrorism, we've been talking about homophobia. Whatever this guy's motivations were, I think we can all agree he was mentally ill. And this is the part of the conversation nobody is getting to at this point. I mean, why can we not strengthen our mental health laws to A, get people more treatment, and B, to get people off the streets if they show any signs of this? I mean, I think that's an argument that we've had going back to the James Holmes case, where by all rights, his psychiatrist should have pulled him out of society with some of the things he was saying. Maybe this guy wasn't showing quite the same signs, but he was on an FBI watch list for his terrorist activities. There's another case, if it's not just mental health, take proactive activity. If you are watching somebody because you're worried about their terrorist leanings, don't sit back, watch them, and let them go. Jump in sooner. Find a reason to get these people out the streets. I don't know. I think at this point we need to have a more active presence in getting threats out of our public sphere. And if we're not, I'll tell you what we're going to see. Ridiculous things. I don't know if you noticed this little blurb, but the parents of the lone American killed in the Paris massacre yesterday filed a lawsuit against Twitter, Facebook, and Google, saying that if these three things did not exist, the Paris massacre would not have happened. People are looking for any kind of answers and anyone to point the finger at now, when we should be offering help to people, and if they're not willing to show symptoms, that they can take help to get them out of society.